Some conversations require breath and space and a little extra time, friends. So way back when I was in my early 20s, a friend and I were out one night and started speculating about if and when we ever had a baby, would we tell people in advance the gender of the child? Would we even want to know ourselves? I said I think I would want it to be a surprise. And my friend replied, "Oh no, I have to tell people because I hate the color yellow. I don't want a yellow baby." You see, way back then when Amazon only sold books, and if you wanted something for someone's baby shower, you had to go to an actual store. And in that store, you'd walk in, and the shelves would be filled with everything you could want for a newborn in one of three colors: pink, blue for boys and girls, and yellow if you didn't know whether to get pink or blue because the parents were radical gender nonconformists who refused to do the decent thing and let people know beforehand whether they should buy the tiny onesies with the little blue dogs or the pink horses, and so your baby would get the yellow ducks. Which is funny because babies can't even begin to see in color until several months after they are born, so they don't really care at all. My friend didn't like the color yellow, so a gender reveal it would be. Thankfully, by the time either of us had a child, society and the internet had changed, and you could find a much wider variety of baby items in a whole spectrum of colors that babies don't care about. So our children were not stuck in a monochromatic gender identity bubble. Judith Butler was right. Navigating gender is a lot of trouble. Gender Trouble is the name of a book written in 1990 by Judith Butler, a philosopher and gender studies scholar whose work radically shifted the way we talk about gender and identity. Despite the fact that the book is written in some of the densest academic language I have ever had the privilege and challenge of trying to understand, Butler actually won an award for having the most tortured sentences in academic writing one year. Despite the challenge of reading this work, the book has filtered out into the conversation in ways that Butler themselves could never have predicted. Butler now uses they/them pronouns. When they wrote Gender Trouble, describing oneself as non-binary was not really something we had commonly accepted language for. But in 2020, things had changed, and just like we'd moved beyond that limited pink, blue, yellow color palette, we'd also moved beyond the limited him, her pronoun choice. And Butler shared that they had never felt fully at home in the female gender assigned them at birth and embraced the ability to name more accurately the way they move through the world. But have we really moved into a new era of embracing a more expansive understanding of gender identity? Despite our relatively progressive stance here in California, the backlash we are seeing around the nation that we have talked about this morning has asked me, how do we hold on to the progress we have made, as well as defend the rights of our siblings in other parts of the country? Because I'll tell you right now, friends, and I think I am not alone, I am not going back to that two-box, monochromatic world. I am not, and none of us are. You can pry my pronouns and those of my friends from my cold hands. I will affirm the humanity of all of us and the wide spectrum of gender diversity we have represented right here in this room and beyond. We will defend that with our very breath. Because that's what this gender panic is all about. We are in a fight for who gets the power to define who is fully human. And we refuse to let this regime dehumanize anyone just because they do not conform to a traditional binary gender identity. We refuse. In Gender Trouble, Butler brings us to that moment I call the baby shower moment, when you walk up to the clerk and say that you need to find a gift for a newborn, and what is the first thing the clerk asks? Is it a boy or a girl? Butler asks us to really think about the very few words in that simple statement, that question that nearly everyone asks when a birth is announced, because it illustrates so clearly what they're trying to say, that the very first way we acknowledge the humanity of a new baby is by assigning them a gender role. Is it a boy or a girl? The shift happens in those words. Without a gender, the baby is an it, a non-human object. The baby only moves from it to a person once the gender is identified. Now that we have ultrasound that lets us peek inside the womb of the gestating genitalia, so gender can be imagined earlier than ever before. But in the pre-ultrasound era, you remember those cinematic moments when the doctor would give birth, and what would be the thing the doctor would say, holding up this newborn to the parents? Congratulations, it's a boy, or it's a girl. The very first words that a child would hear would be an assignment, a task, a condition. You are a boy or a girl, so live accordingly. The baby only then occupies our imagination as a real human being once we can imagine a gendered body, Butler says. Without that anchor, our mind kind of slips and slides. What exactly is the mother holding in that blanket? Given such a way of welcoming babies into the world, Butler says, the mark of gender appears to qualify bodies as human bodies. The moment in which an infant becomes humanized is when the question, is it a boy or a girl, is answered. Which raises the question, what about bodies that don't fit so neatly into that humanization? They become easy to reduce as less than, easy to dismiss as illegitimate expressions of humanity. And as this thinking goes, if you continue to follow this train of thought, if someone is given a gendered label at birth and then rejects that label later in life, are they not rejecting their own humanity? The authoritarian government is asking us. If we follow that logic that says gender identity is fixed from birth into one of two immutable, irreversible categories, the claim then becomes that people who are transgender are choosing their own self-exile from the human family, and therefore the state has no obligation to respect their rights. It is not us, the authoritarian state says, that is the problem. It is the person who refuses to comply with the very first simple assignment. Be the boy or girl you were instructed to be, or suffer the consequences. You brought it on yourself. Butler calls this the violence of the foreclosed life. The violence of the foreclosed life. This is what we are struggling against. We who believe that life is precious, is sacred, is beautiful in all of its diverse expression, we are struggling against not a person, not even a group of people, but an ideology that tries to do violence upon our lives, that tries to foreclose possibilities even from that moment of first breath. The goal in a totalitarian state is to render certain kinds of life not just unlivable, but even unthinkable, to remove the very words we use to describe it. The violence of a foreclosed life. So what do we do? How do we approach this unwieldy and enormous gender trouble issue that Butler has identified among us? They've been doing a lot of writing and thinking about authoritarian and totalitarian regimes lately. Their latest book I highly commend to you, much more readable. Who's Afraid of Gender is the title. And Butler explores how authoritarian regimes use gender as this wedge to divide us. Use this tiny percentage of the population magnified and expanded as a way of asserting their authority and control over all of us. So what is the way forward? Solidarity is what Butler says. Butler recognizes without solidarity, the trans community cannot survive in an authoritarian state. Without solidarity, Butler, even with their relative privilege as a white professor at Berkeley, Butler's life in this world, in this moment, is at risk. Butler is asking if we have their back. Solidarity is not just a strategy for winning, it is necessary for surviving. So let us cultivate that here, my friends. Let us cultivate that compassionate solidarity, grounded in love, grounded in our understanding of our interdependence, grounded in the fact that we are all in this together. That is the universalist part of Unitarian Universalism. It's all of us or none of us. So let it be all of us. Let us lean into the simple things like respecting pronouns and practicing using them even if we stumble. There's little stickers you can put on your name tag that you can get at the welcome table. Did you know that? With your pronouns right there on them. We can celebrate Transgender Day of Visibility, recognizing that holidays like that lift up and celebrate the beauty and joy that it can be found in a trans identity, not just, as Lisa so eloquently pointed out, the trauma and pathos that is ascribed onto it by the system, which is traumatic, not the people. We can lift up and celebrate those moments together, and we can find spaces and places to work through our own fears, our own histories and inherited stories around gender and gender identity. And cultivating solidarity means taking the time to imagine and dream not just of what we don't want, but of the world that we do want. To keep envisioning that world we want to inhabit. So even if we are sailing in different boats, our eyes are on the same horizon. It means being willing to make good gender trouble together. That is our assignment. Let us do it.